You may not know this story. In 1948, the French crossed the English Channel in a bloody campaign, indiscriminately killing thousands of Britons. As part of the colonization, which was supported and funded by Germany, it drove more than 700,000 Britons from their homes without the right to return, burnt hundreds of towns, and built an apartheid architecture that relegated Britons to a sanctioned second-class existence. Decades of oppression followed, violence and murder, enforced segregation, children slaughtered, others seized without charge, and a daily, relentless humiliation. Unsurprisingly, Britons rose in resistance. It is the reflex of the caged. An occupied people grasp at any of the tools at their disposal to strive for their freedom. The world, seeing clearly, denounced the French occupation as illegitimate and oppressive, yet no one came to their aid. Then on one day, on October 7th, one faction of the British resistance mounted a meticulously planned operation to capture prisoners of war and force the release of illegally detained Britons. Chaos intervened, and, according to French military sources, long accused of disinformation and even lethal friendly fire under official directives, hundreds of civilians were killed. Typical of the colonial mind, the French seized the moment as a pretext to complete its illegal occupation and tighten its grip on the British public. It carpet-bombed more than 60% of London, deliberately targeted civilians, killing hundreds of thousands. They used sophisticated AI killer drones, as well as trained snipers to target children, medics, journalists, and aid workers. They destroyed hospitals and places of worship. They orchestrated forced displacement, blocked relief from entering the capital, and weaponized hunger, starvation by design, as an instrument of tyranny. Then the French named the carnage self-defense. However, scholars, international lawyers, human rights organizations, French ones included, and international legal bodies called it for what it was: a genocide. The world answered. An oppressor cannot hide slaughter with a slogan. France's actions as an occupying power were universally condemned as barbaric and unjustifiable. Germany's support for tyranny and evil was categorically denounced. Oppression is not legitimized by the resistance it provokes. Genocide is never warranted, never justified. So why then has the Zionist state of Israel been met with support when it has done precisely this to Palestinians? Why do so many echo the empty slogan, "What about October 7?" when the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, genocide scholars, and leading human rights organizations, including Israeli ones, call what's happening in Palestine genocide? How do Zionist advocates and Western politicians still justify it? The line of argument is neither moral nor logical. It is a fallacy, a crude form of whataboutism. It seeks to excuse the crime of genocide by pointing to the wrongdoing of others. More dangerously, it conceals the roots of the conflict, erasing history and obscuring the central fact that the oppression stems from Zionist colonization, not from Palestinian existence. To claim that the conflict began on October 7 or that October 7 is where our moral reasoning should start is either ignorance or ideological deceit. It is to begin the story in the middle, discarding decades of occupation, dispossession, murder, illegal imprisonment, and apartheid. Such framing is not only dishonest, it's an attempt to legitimize the mass killing of civilians under the guise of self-defense. Let's be clear. When the narrative of October 7 is wielded to justify genocide, it is not only historically false, it is morally obscene. It reveals the moral and historical amnesia that enables crimes against humanity to be reframed as acts of justice. This is why this video is piercing the amnesia, to dismantle the excuses and to remind us of the enduring truth. Oppression is never legitimized by pointing to the violence it provokes. Genocide cannot be justified. Considering the previous thought experiment, one can argue that the Palestinian resistance, in analogous terms, is justified and ought to command the full support of the international community. There's no essential difference, apart from race and religion, between the hypothetical British response and the lived reality of Palestinians who have endured relentless assaults on both the material existence and their identity. This is not to justify the events of October 7, nor to endorse any particular faction or resistance. Rather, it is to advance a moral argument that forces us to radically reframe the Israel-Palestine question. The claim that Israel is defending itself collapses under scrutiny. As a nuclear power with one of the most advanced military arsenals in the world, Israel enjoys unchallenged hegemony in the region and possesses the capacity to suppress Palestinian aspirations at will. An occupying force, by definition, is already in an illegal and aggressive posture. International law grants no legitimacy to its claim of self-defense against those it occupies. To suggest otherwise is as illogical and as morally perverse as a murderer claiming self-defense from the resistance of their victim before they were killed. Let's be plain. Since 1948, the Palestinian people have endured not one, but more than 10 October 7s. If Zionists and their supporters seek moral consistency, it points in one direction: support for a people's struggle for liberation. There are too many dead to name, yet enough to make the case. Consider the following. 1948 marks the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, when more than 400 villages were erased, wells poisoned, entire communities driven out by Zionist militias. Over 700,000 people forced from their homes and denied return. This was not chaos, but design. In that single year, historians record between 10 and 70 massacres with at least 800 Arab civilians and prisoners of war killed. In just 2 days in September in 1982, the Sabra and Shatila massacre happened. 2,000 to 3,500 Palestinian refugees and Lebanese civilians were slaughtered by a right-wing militia operating with Israeli support and coordination. In October 1956, 49 villages, including women, children, and even unborn infants, were gunned down. What is now known as the Kafr Qasim massacre, it was a tragic loss of life. 67 civilians were killed in the Qibya massacre in October 1953, homes blown apart, set ablaze, bullets indiscriminate. 275 civilians were killed in house-to-house sweeps during the Khan Yunis massacre in November 1956. Local counts increased the number killed as high as 415. From 2000 to 2022, more than 2,240 Palestinian children were killed by Zionist tyranny and settler violence in the occupied territories. And these are the children who were not involved in any hostilities. To add to the murder and to add to the massacres, you have illegal child prisoners and detainees, torture, persecution, and apartheid. It's estimated that the Israeli military detains and prosecutes between 500 and 700 Palestinian children every year in Israeli military courts. These courts lack basic safeguards for fair trial from the moment of arrest, and they are often violently taken from their beds in night raids. Most Palestinian children are subjected to ill treatment, torture, and violations of their fundamental rights at the hands of Israeli forces. For decades, Palestinians have faced oppression, apartheid, and persecution. Human Rights Watch report, A Threshold Crossed, published in 2021, found that Israel was involved in discrimination, dispossession, confinement, forced separation, subjugation, so severe in places that they amount to the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. Even with this partial history I have just relayed to you, it reaches over 5,400 dead, more than 4 times of the number killed on October 7. Tally all of the Zionist inflicted tyranny and you probably surpass 10 October 7s. This is not a numbers game, it is a mirror, and in it a brutal asymmetry. Palestinian lives are not being grieved with equal weight. They have not been valued the same as other lives. Begin the moral calculus on October 7 and you erase decades of massacres, thousands of dead children, the Nakba, and the cement of an apartheid system. The conclusion is stark and unavoidable. The Palestinian cause is not a footnote, nor reducible to Hamas or any single faction. It is the long struggle of a people systematically denied dignity, justice, and sovereignty. To ignore this truth is not neutrality, it is complicity. And if you begin in the middle, you erase the beginning. If you erase the beginning, you justify the present genocide. So here's the question we must ask. Why is Palestinian blood discounted? Why is their pain erased from the moral calculus? Even Zionist leaders themselves admit the truth. In 2021, Bezalel Smotrich, a senior Israeli politician, stood in parliament and told Arab members, "You are only here by mistake. Ben-Gurion didn't finish the job in 1948. An Israeli officer, Yehoshua Verbin, confessed, "We expelled 500,000 Arabs. We burnt homes, we looted their land, we never gave it back." This is not Palestinian propaganda. These are the words of Israeli officials themselves. So if Israel's own leaders admit to ethnic cleansing, why does the world remain silent? And yet, whenever Palestinians resist, the same objections are raised. Let's examine them. First objection: Palestinians do not have a right to armed struggle. Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are proscribed groups among many Western nations. However, this does not entail that the ambitions of the Palestinian people must be curtailed. The fact of the matter is that the indigenous inhabitants of a given land or territory enjoy the legal right to assert their independence and be freed from external interference. Just like another human society or group, the Palestinians have a right to form and rule their independent state. A myriad of General Assembly resolutions passed under the auspices of the United Nations permits national liberation movements to achieve their independence, even by utilization of force. For instance, this is found in the General Assembly Resolution number 38/17 of 1983. The latter was passed against the backdrop of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which culminated with several massacres against Palestinian refugees. Besides condemning these atrocities, the resolution in question reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for their independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial domination, apartheid, and foreign occupation by available means, including armed struggle. With these various resolutions, it becomes evident that the Palestinian people deserve the collective right to independence and liberation from Zionist colonization, even through the use of armed struggle. Any critic or interlocutor who directs the analysis merely towards Hamas without acknowledging the collective right of the Palestinian people to attain independence is a partner in oppression. Second objection: Israel has the right to defend itself. Gaza remains effectively occupied and deprived of the basic attributes of statehood. Israel cannot claim the right to defend itself from a threat that comes from an area under its occupation. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon warned against the deception of treating occupied territory as unoccupied, noting that such framing wrongly casts Israel as a victim of a neighboring state, when insofar as there is a victim party, it is the occupied. The International Court of Justice said about Israel's citation of self-defense has no relevance when the threat originates within the territory under Israel's control and is not attributable to a foreign state. An occupier cannot invoke self-defense against the territory it occupies. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian territories, puts it unequivocally. Israel cannot claim the right of self-defense against a threat that emanates from a territory it occupies. Simply put, waging war on the territory you occupy is an absurd proposition in law. Third objection: Gaza is no longer occupied. Gaza is not occupied, we're told, because Israel withdrew settlers and troops in 2005 and Palestinians supposedly chose their own ruin. But occupations don't end with a press conference. They end when effective control ends. Every serious authority, the ICRC, the UN, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, even the US State Department has continued to recognize Gaza as occupied since 1967 because Israel still dictates the enclave's airspace and waters, polices its crossings, throttles its economy, and controls the population registry, tax revenues, and essential infrastructure. The Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights calls this what it is. Withdrawal plus ongoing control equals occupation. UN voices from John Dugard and Ban Ki-moon said the same thing, describing Gaza as sealed off and still under Israeli power. The result is not autonomy, but a blockade that cages movement and possibility. And the trajectory since 2023 runs one way: deep incursions, large swathes seized, and the long-stated readiness to enter and pull out as needed, all signal entrenchment, not liberation. In plain terms, Gaza's people have never been granted the sovereignty they are blamed for misusing. The hand that controls their borders, skies, registry, and lifelines is the hand that occupies them. Fourth objection: if Hamas disappeared, peace would follow. But history tells us another story. Israel was oppressing, dispossessing, and killing Palestinians for 40 years before Hamas even existed. The problem is not Hamas. The problem is the colonization itself. Remove one faction and another will emerge. If Hamas disappeared, peace would follow is a comforting myth that collapses under history and law. Decades before Hamas existed, Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza produced killings, mass arrests, curfews, and daily humiliation. The machinery of control, not Hamas, was already in motion. After 1988, Hamas governed Gaza, while the West Bank, where Hamas does not rule, saw relentless settlement expansion and a separate and unequal regime documented by major rights groups, proving the driver is occupation, not one faction. Even so, Hamas repeatedly floated long truces: 1988, 2006, 2008, 2012, 2017. Israel refused anything that threatened demographic dominance or required withdrawal from occupied land. Peace is not the absence of any group, it is the presence of justice, an end to occupation, an end to apartheid, and to end illegal settlements and occupation. Remove Hamas tomorrow, and with the same territorial theft and control in place, new resistance will arise for the same reason any people resist dispossession. The cause of the violence is structural. Until that structure falls, peace is just a slogan. Fifth objection: Arabs are judges and sit in the Knesset, therefore it's not apartheid. Multiple human rights organizations and authorities have concluded that Israel enforces an apartheid system. Pointing to a few Arab judges or Knesset members is optics, not evidence. Tokens don't dissolve a system built to dominate. Israel's discriminatory framework meets the Apartheid Convention because it functions as a whole to keep Palestinian Arabs subordinate. The Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel, which is colloquially known as Adala, developed the Discriminatory Laws Database and maps over 60 statutes, some openly biased, many neutral on paper but with disparate impact, that restrict Arab rights across social, economic, and political life. Historically, martial law smothered Arab political organizing. Today, mainstream Jewish parties routinely exclude Arab parties from governing coalitions, ensuring representation without power. A seat in the gallery does not equal a voice at the table. Apartheid is measured in laws, structures, and lived reality, not photo ops. Let's conclude. This conflict did not begin on October 7, and it will not end by pretending it did. Their record is plain. Decades of dispossession, occupation, apartheid laws, and mass civilian death cannot be washed away by a slogan about self-defense. And occupying power cannot claim the moral high ground against the people it cages. If you condemn violence, then moral consistency demands you condemn it wherever it is wielded, whether by non-state actors on one bloody day or by a state machinery that has ground on for generations. To start the story in the middle is to excuse the beginning. To excuse the beginning is to justify the present genocide. The Nakba is not a memory, but a mechanism still in motion. Justice then requires clarity and courage. Clarity to name what the evidence shows: colonization, apartheid, and systematic dehumanization. Courage to insist on the only terms that can produce a just peace: an end to occupation, an end to the siege, accountability for crimes, past and present, and the full recognition of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Anything less perpetuates the cycle and rewards impunity. Our task is not to manufacture balance between the oppressor and the oppressed, but to restore balance by ending oppression. If we truly seek a future without more graves and without more grief, we must refuse the amnesia. We must reject the double standards and stand openly, consistently, and unambiguously on the side of truth and justice. We're just scratching the surface here. Please read the essay on this topic I have written for our Palestine Truth campaign, and click here to watch Abdullah Andalusi's deep dive on the topic, and the links are in the description below.